An alien mother, cast aside by her own people, faces a human soldier at night. The sky was broken. Ash and smoke drifted like black snow, settling over what had once been a city. Steel beams jutted out of the ground like the bones of giants, and the air carried the sharp taste of fire that refused to die. Through that silence walked a soldier. His uniform was torn, his face lined with dirt and blood, and every step was heavy, like his boots carried the weight of ghosts. He had fought too long, seen too much, and yet something inside him kept him moving forward when he had no reason left to fight. He thought he was alone. But then, he heard it. A sound too soft to belong to the battlefield. Not the crash of metal or the scream of dying machines. Not the thunder of artillery. No, it was smaller. Fragile. The whimper of something living. His hand went to his weapon by instinct, though his heart begged otherwise. He followed the sound, moving past the husk of a fallen transport, its armor blackened and peeled open like a carcass. Beyond it, in the shadows of a ruined wall, he saw her. At first, he thought it was a trick of smoke. But no, there she was. A figure not human, curled against the rubble as though the stone might shield her. Her skin shimmered faintly under the weak light, patterns of color running across it like the reflection of water. In her trembling arms, she held something even smaller, a child, swaddled in torn fabric, its faint breaths almost drowned by the wind. The soldier froze. His orders, his training, his memories, all screamed at him to turn away. She was the enemy. Her kind had burned his home, shattered his world. He had lost brothers and sisters to their war machines. And yet. Her eyes lifted to meet his. Not the eyes of a soldier. Not the eyes of an enemy. They were the eyes of a mother. Wide, desperate, shining with fear and exhaustion. They begged without words, begged with a voice deeper than language. For a long, silent moment, the ruined city seemed to hold its breath around them. He could have walked on. He could have left her in the ashes. But his boots carried him forward anyway. When he knelt before her, she flinched, clutching the child tighter, her breath coming quick and shallow. He raised one hand, slowly, deliberately, not touching her, just letting her see that he carried no threat in that moment. His voice was raw when he finally spoke, almost a whisper against the ruin. "Easy now. I'm not here to hurt you." Of course, she could not understand the words. Her kind spoke in tones and harmonics, not human syllables. Yet something passed between them anyway. The mother's trembling eased, just slightly. The child whimpered once, then went quiet, as though sensing that its fate hung in the balance. The soldier reached into his pack, pulled free the last ration he carried, and set it on the ground between them. He didn't push it closer, didn't force it into her hands. He just placed it there, like an offering. Then he leaned back, resting on one knee, waiting. She stared at him. Her hands shook. Her lips moved, releasing a sound like a broken melody, a song cracked with pain. Slowly, with the caution of someone who had been betrayed too many times, she reached out and took the ration. The soldier let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. In that moment, under the shattered sky, surrounded by the wreckage of their two people's war, a single fragile thread of trust had been woven. Not victory. Not peace. But the smallest spark of something that might become both. The alien mother held the ration in her hands as though it might vanish if she blinked. She studied it, her eyes flicking to the soldier, then back to the small bundle cradled against her chest. The child stirred, giving a faint cry, and she tore the packet open with movements that were quick, almost frantic. A strange sound left her throat, something between a sigh and a sob, as she pressed the food to the child's lips. The soldier watched in silence. His hand remained near his weapon, but he did not raise it. Every instinct told him he was too close, too vulnerable. But there was no weapon in her arms, no malice in her face. Just hunger, exhaustion, and something far more familiar, love. For a time, the only sounds were the distant crackle of fires and the quiet breaths of a mother feeding her child. The soldier shifted slightly, his knees aching against the broken concrete. He was not sure what compelled him to stay. Maybe it was pity. Maybe it was something deeper, something he had forgotten in the chaos of war. When she finally looked up again, her eyes carried less fear. Wariness, yes, but also something softer, a cautious recognition. He raised a hand to his chest, tapped his fingers there. "Human," he said slowly, letting the word fall heavy, like a stone into still water. Then he pointed to her. "Waiting." She hesitated, as though the act of answering might be dangerous. Her lips parted, and a sound left her layered tones, a trembling name that resonated like chords strummed too softly. It was not a word he could shape with his tongue, but it was hers. He nodded. Pointed again to himself. "Human." Pointed to her. Tried to echo the sound she had made. His attempt was clumsy, almost laughable. But something flickered in her expression, the shadow of a smile, small and fleeting. That smile struck him harder than any weapon could have. He reached into his pack again, pulling out his canteen. He unscrewed the cap, raised it halfway, then stopped. Slowly, deliberately, he set it down between them, just as he had with the food. Her eyes followed his every move. Her breath quickened, then slowed, as though she were fighting an invisible battle inside herself. Finally, she reached forward, fingers trembling, and lifted the canteen. She sniffed at it cautiously before touching it to her lips. Water ran down her chin as she drank too quickly, as though afraid it might be snatched away. Then she pressed the canteen gently to the child's mouth, guiding the liquid in careful sips. The soldier exhaled. Relief washed through him, though he couldn't say why. He leaned back against the wall, exhaustion pulling at his bones. The adrenaline that had carried him here was fading, and every wound, every ache, made itself known. His head fell back against the cold stone, eyes closing for a moment too long. When he opened them again, she was watching him. Not with fear. Not anymore. But with something closer to wonder. Perhaps she had been taught that humans were merciless. That they killed without hesitation, that compassion was alien to them. Perhaps, in her world, kindness had been a thing reserved only for the strong. And now here they were, two broken lives on a ruined battlefield, sharing the smallest fragments of trust. The soldier gave a tired smile, the kind that held no strength but still meant something. He raised his hand once more, pointing to himself. "Friend." The word was simple. Too simple to cross the gulf between them. But his voice carried it, low and steady, until it became more than a word. Her eyes glistened in the half-light. She shifted the child in her arms, then, with a trembling hand, she reached out and touched her chest. Her lips moved, and though the sound was not the same, the meaning was clear. She was answering. The thread between them tightened, fragile but unbroken. For the first time in longer than he could remember, the soldier felt the faintest warmth in the hollow of his chest. Night fell like a curtain of ash. The fires in the distance glowed faintly, their smoke rising into the broken stars above. The battlefield was quiet now, but quiet did not mean safe. Quiet meant the scavengers were hunting. Quiet meant patrols could be near. The soldier knew they could not remain in the ruins. His instincts screamed that staying here was a death sentence, for him, and for the fragile life that had now been tied to his. He pushed himself to his feet, muscles aching, and gestured gently toward her. He pointed away from the shattered wall, into the shadows of the streets beyond. His hand flattened, palm facing her, an unspoken promise, "I will not harm you." Her arms tightened protectively around the child. She hesitated, fear flickering in her gaze. But then she looked back at the smoldering ruins where she had been left to die, and something in her expression shifted. Resolve. Slowly, she rose. Her movements were unsteady, her body too weak, but she stood nonetheless. Together, they stepped into the night. The city was a graveyard of steel and stone. Towers leaned like broken teeth, their windows hollow eyes staring into nothing. Vehicles lay overturned, their frames twisted by fire. The streets were littered with silence, punctuated only by the occasional creak of metal cooling in the night air. The soldier moved with practiced caution, his ears tuned to the faintest sounds. Each shadow could conceal a sniper. Each alley could hide a mine. Yet beside him, the alien mother walked softly, her bare feet making little more than whispers against the cracked ground. She held her child close, and the soldier noticed the way she hummed faintly, low in her throat, a melody meant not for him, but for the small one in her arms. That sound pierced him more than the silence of war ever could. It was gentle, fragile, human, though it came from lips not shaped like his. They paused beneath the shelter of a collapsed bridge. The soldier scanned the horizon, then gestured for her to sit. She lowered herself carefully, curling her body around the child, shielding it even in rest. From his pack, he drew another scrap of food, breaking it in two. He set half before her, kept half for himself. He chewed slowly, forcing the stale ration down, his eyes never leaving the shadows. When he glanced at her, she was watching him again. Her eyes held questions he could not answer. Why was he helping? Why had he not left her? Did humans ever act without a reason? He didn't know how to explain. He barely knew himself. Perhaps it was because he had seen too many graves. Perhaps because he had once promised himself he would never let a child die on his watch, no matter whose child it was. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe he was just tired of hate. The wind shifted. He froze, holding up a hand. She stilled instantly, clutching her child to her chest. From far off, the sound of engines rolled through the ruins, faint, but growing. Searchlights swept lazily over the broken skyline. Enemy patrols. The soldier's jaw tightened. He pointed to her, then to the shadows beneath the bridge, urging her deeper into cover. She obeyed, crouching low, her arms curling protectively around the infant. He pressed himself against the rubble, every nerve alive with tension. The engines rumbled closer, then slowed. For a terrible moment, he thought they would stop right above them. His hand hovered over his weapon, heart pounding. But the machines moved on, their noise fading into the night. Only when silence returned did he let out the breath he had been holding. He turned toward her. She was still crouched, still trembling, her face pressed against the child's head. Very softly, without thinking, he whispered, "Safe now." Of course, she didn't understand the words. But she lifted her gaze, and the look she gave him said enough. Gratitude. Fragile trust. The faintest flicker of belief that perhaps he truly meant to keep her alive. They stayed beneath the bridge until the stars shifted overhead, then set out once more, their path lit by the pale glow of a broken moon. Two figures moving through a graveyard of war. A soldier with no home. A mother who had been thrown away. And a child whose breath carried the weight of both their futures. Dawn came softly, bleeding gray light into the ruins. The soldier led them out of the city's skeleton, guiding their steps toward the wilderness beyond. Grass pushed through cracks in the pavement, reaching toward a sun hidden behind smoke. The world was quiet here, but not gentle. Quiet only meant they could hear their own exhaustion. The soldier's legs ached with every step, yet he stayed a pace ahead, scanning the horizon. The alien mother followed closely, clutching her child with a fierce, desperate strength. Her feet bled where sharp stone had cut her skin, but she made no sound of pain. They reached the edge of a forest where shattered machines had been left to rust. Branches creaked overhead, hiding them beneath a canopy of dying leaves. The air was cooler here, heavy with the scent of soil and smoke. It was here, in the shadows of the trees, that the soldier finally allowed himself to rest. He sank against the trunk of a fallen tree, shoulders heavy, and gestured for her to sit nearby. She hesitated, then lowered herself a short distance away, her child nestled against her chest. For a while, they sat in silence, the forest breathing around them. He closed his eyes, listening to the wind. When he opened them again, she was watching him. There was no fear in her gaze this time. Only curiosity. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a strip of cloth, worn and faded. It had once been part of his unit's flag, salvaged after the last battle where so many had fallen. He turned it over in his hands, the colors dulled by ash, then held it out. She tilted her head, puzzled. He touched it to his chest, over his heart. Then he extended it again. A gesture. A piece of himself. Slowly, carefully, she reached out. Her fingers brushed against the cloth, against his hand. For an instant, he felt the warmth of her skin, not cold, not strange, but alive. She took the fabric, studying its frayed edges. Then, in a gesture that seemed almost instinctive, she wrapped it gently around her child, tucking it into the swaddling. The soldier's throat tightened. He looked away, staring into the trees, fighting something he could not name. Later, when hunger gnawed at them again, he broke another ration and handed half to her. She tried to refuse, shaking her head, pressing the food back toward him. Her meaning was clear, you need this more. But he pushed it back to her, his voice rough but firm. Eat. The word meant nothing to her ears, but the tone did. She accepted the food, breaking it into small pieces to feed the child first. Only then did she eat what remained, chewing slowly, eyes never leaving him. As the sun lowered, the soldier built a small fire from broken branches. Flames flickered, throwing their light across the hollow between them. He sat on one side, she on the other, the warmth of the fire binding them in its fragile circle. For the first time, she made a sound that was not fear. A soft tone, rising and falling, like a lullaby woven from sorrow. She sang to the child, her voice carrying through the stillness. The soldier listened, his chest tight. The melody was alien, but the feeling within it was not. It was the sound of love. The sound of a mother promising her child that somehow, despite the ashes, there was still safety in her arms. He stared into the fire, blinking against the sting in his eyes. When the song faded, silence filled the space again. But it was not the silence of strangers. It was the silence of two people bound by something neither had expected to find. The soldier looked across the fire, his voice low, his words carried more by tone than meaning. You're not alone anymore. She tilted her head, as if hearing something beneath the sounds. Her eyes softened. And though no language bridged the gap, something inside both of them understood. The forest did not stay kind. By the third night, the soldier knew they were being hunted. Tracks too fresh. Branches broken in ways that spoke of more than wind. The war had spread here, bleeding into every shadow, and now the shadows followed them. He carried no illusions. If they were found, mercy would not be given. Not to him. Not to her. Certainly not to the child. The soldier moved faster, urging her forward with gestures and sharp glances. Her body was weak, trembling from exhaustion, but she pressed on. She did not complain, did not falter. The child whimpered softly against her chest, and each sound drove the soldier harder, like a knife against his ribs. Then came the night when the quiet was shattered. They were crossing a ravine, following the bones of a broken road, when the roar of engines split the air. Lights cut through the trees, blinding, merciless. Voices shouted in a language of commands and steel. The soldier spun, pulling the alien mother into cover behind a collapsed section of stone. He crouched low, heart hammering, scanning the tree line. Shapes moved, armored patrols, weapons gleaming in the firelight. They were closing in. The mother clutched her child tighter, her eyes wide with terror. She looked to him, desperate, as though his body alone stood between them and death. The soldier drew his rifle. His hands shook, not with fear, but with the weight of what he was about to do. He had sworn to protect them. He had promised, even without words, that she would not be alone. He could not break that promise now. He leaned close, his voice a whisper, rough but steady. "Stay down. Don't move." She didn't understand the words, but she understood him. Her trembling eased. She pressed her back against the stone, curling around her child, hiding them both in the smallest shape she could make. The soldier rose. He moved into the open, using the broken road as cover, his rifle raised. His breath slowed, his vision narrowing until the world became shadows and targets. The first shot cracked through the night. A soldier fell. Then another. Shouts rose, engines revved, the chaos of pursuit exploding into violence. The human soldier fought like a man who had nothing left to lose, and everything left to protect. He moved with grim precision, each shot a prayer, each step a defiance. Bullets sparked against stone, trees split under fire, and the forest itself was screaming with the violence. But he was only one man. And there were many. A burst of fire caught him across the shoulder. Pain tore through him, hot and searing. He staggered, teeth clenched, but did not fall. His body screamed for rest, for surrender, but he pressed on, forcing his hands to steady, forcing his heart to beat. Behind the broken wall, the alien mother pressed her hand against her mouth, muffling a sob. Her eyes never left him, this human who fought not for glory, not for orders, but for her and the fragile life in her arms. And then it happened. An enemy soldier broke through the line, weapon raised, charging toward her. She cried out, her body curling over her child, knowing she could not stop what was coming. But the human soldier was faster. He threw himself into the path, his rifle a blur, his body a shield. The attacker fell, but so did he, collapsing to his knees, his weapon clattering against stone. Blood ran hot down his arm, dripping into the dirt. His breath came ragged, his vision blurring. Still, he turned back, his eyes finding hers. Even in the chaos, even in the storm of death, his gaze locked onto hers as though tethered by something unbreakable. He did not speak. He didn't need to. The promise was there in his eyes. "I will not let them take you." The soldier's vision swam. Gunfire cracked through the trees, each shot a hammer against his ribs, each shout a reminder that death was still reaching for them. He forced himself upright, pain screaming through his shoulder, and pulled the trigger again. One enemy fell. Then another. But there were too many. His rifle clicked empty. He fumbled for another magazine, hands slick with blood, but it slipped through his fingers and clattered against the stone. He staggered back, his body barely holding him upright. In the shadows, he saw them closing in, shapes moving with cold precision, weapons raised. He knew, with a grim certainty, that he had reached the edge. And then, the world shifted. A sound filled the night, sharp, keening, fierce. Not human. Not mechanical. The alien mother had risen from her cover. Her voice rang through the forest in layered tones, a cry that was both battle and mourning, rage and love. She stood tall, her child clutched against her chest, and from her throat poured a sound so piercing, so raw, that the enemy soldiers faltered. For the briefest heartbeat, they hesitated. It was enough. The human soldier surged forward with the last of his strength. He seized his weapon like a staff, swung it with all the fury left in his bones, and drove back the nearest attacker. He fought not with skill now, but with will, and will was enough. The patrol broke. Retreating into the trees, their engines roaring, their voices fading into the distance. Silence fell again. The soldier collapsed to his knees, the rifle slipping from his hands. His body trembled, his breath shallow. The world tilted around him, shadows closing in. But then, gentle hands touched him. The alien mother knelt beside him, her child still in her arms. She pressed her forehead to his, her breath trembling, her skin warm against his. Strange sounds left her lips, not words he could understand, but sounds that carried meaning all the same. She was pleading. Begging him not to leave. His eyes burned. He forced his hand to rise, to touch her arm. His voice came out broken, a whisper swallowed by the forest. Safe, you're safe. Tears shimmered in her eyes. She shook her head, refusing to let the word mean goodbye. She pressed her free hand against his wound, her fingers slick with his blood, trying desperately to stop what she could not stop. And then, faint, fragile, like the breaking of dawn, the child's voice. A small cry, thin and insistent, cutting through the weight of despair. The soldier turned his head, his vision blurring, and saw the child's face. Eyes wide, reaching toward him with tiny hands. He let out a laugh, soft and cracked. A sound that was almost joy. The mother lowered the child closer. The soldier lifted his hand, trembling, and brushed his fingers against the infant's skin. Warm. Alive. For the first time in so long, he felt something rise inside him that was not pain, not sorrow. Hope. The night passed slowly. She tended his wounds as best she could, her songs filling the silence, her child pressed between them as though binding their broken bodies together. And when the dawn finally broke, spilling light through the trees, the soldier opened his eyes to see her still there, watching him, her gaze fierce and unyielding. He was alive. She was alive. The child was alive. The war still raged beyond the horizon. The world was still broken. But here, in this fragile corner of it, something new had been born. Not victory. Not peace. Not yet. But a bond. A soldier who had nothing left. A mother who had been thrown away. And a child whose breath had tied them both to life. They rose together with the dawn. And though the road ahead was long and filled with shadows, they walked it side by side, toward a future neither had thought they would see.